Hello everyone and welcome to the Creative Noahland podcast. On this episode, I'm joined by award-winning documentary filmmaker and photographer and now studio owner, Paul Stringer. Paul cares passionately about social issues and has documented everything from the migrant crisis in Calais, anti-austerity protests, far-right marches to countless UK-based community and social projects. Paul talks us through starting his journey as a jobbing photographer, hustling to make his creativity pay, and how a random ad on Gumtree, a trip to Bosnia, and a poetry night all became huge turning points in his career, where he really began to see and understand the power that sharing images and video can have on people's perceptions of the world and events around us. Learning to tap into the deeper elements of human life and developing his passion for storytelling, it's at this point Paul discovers poetry, a medium that he instantly felt a connection to and a medium that he believes has the ability to change the world. A bold statement, I know, but one that he's backing up in his actions in the best way that he can. Not in writing poetry, but by documenting and shining a light on poets, their work and their unique ways of storytelling. His hard work being an advocate for poets and poetry has resulted in an Arts Council funded exhibition called The City That Spoke to Me. Paul now continues to push and promote poets in his brand new YouTube project, Crate Poetry. Crate Poetry is a digital platform for well-produced, high-quality poetry performance sets. Paul, once again, shining a light onto poets and their work to an online global audience, using his skills to spread their stories. We joke in the episode about how Paul has sort of become Mr. Poetry, but it's inspiring to hear about Paul's journey to find his passion for documenting this medium and his mission to support and promote poetry in the best way that he can. Now, you can find links and check out Crate Poetry and all of Paul's other work in the show notes while you're listening to the podcast, of course. Anyway, enough of me. Paul's way better at telling this story, so let's get into it. Paul, thanks for doing this. Appreciate you having me here at PS Studios.
Welcome to the HQ of the Empire.
Well, it is really the new HQ of the Empire, but I want to talk about that a bit later. I've spoken in the introduction all about who you are and what you do, but I'd like to, if possible, go back to Paul Stringer, the prodigal child. Before all this creative magic happened, what sort of a kid were you? Were you a overly creative kid? Did you emphasize creativity when you were growing up?
I think I was probably a mediocre creative. But like as a kid, I was very into sport mostly. So yeah, football, running, rugby, basketball, anything like sporty was my outlet, I think. For the most part, creativity, I think probably just was around like painting, drawing, that kind of stuff. But nothing, I wouldn't say anything that was like, anything that was kind of bigger than that really, like out of the normal for a kid of my age in my circumstance.
So you weren't gearing any of your studies, GCSEs, A-levels or anything towards
Not until, so I left school and I went to sixth form and studied media, psychology, English and PE, really with no idea of what I wanted to do. I was interested in sport. I was interested in media just because it was a subject that was kind of like different to everything else that I'd been studying. And same with psychology. I'm not a psychologist now, so that didn't pan out. And I'm also not a footballer, so media seemed to be one that I kind of resonated with. And we had this wicked project, which was to design a poster to stop drink driving. And I remember like having the vision to like put, the idea was to photograph my dad drinking a pint and then put why I remember this so clearly, I don't know, but I put photoshopped his lips onto the pint glass. It was crude, but it was the thing was when the drink starts talking, you start walking. And I thought that was pretty good. And that was kind of my first, I guess, like creative outlet that I've like I mean, obviously I like paint as a kid and draw, but I was never any good at drawing. I never felt like comfortable drawing or painting in art.
Can I just ask, having obviously been your friend for a while, I know that you dropped out of your A-levels, didn't you?
Yeah, so I dropped out of sixth form after that because media was the only subject I liked. And my best mate at the time was going to Stratford College, which to like just locate everyone. Like I grew up in Redditch. Stratford's about a 30-minute drive away. Very difficult to get by bus then, which was a stress. But yeah, she went to Stratford College to do A-levels and dropped out of sixth form, like same as me. And then she mentioned there was a media course there. It was practical, it was hands-on. At the time, I'd been doing a hospital radio with a friend just for the fun of it, really. Something to do on a Friday night. And I went and did media at Stratford College, and it was the best decision I'd made. It was all hands-on, it was super practical, really flexible, and I was creating and making stuff, and I was creating in an environment that I felt really suited me. So yeah, it was really positive.
And in terms of that course, you had lecturers that were working within the industry, right?
Yeah, so I think one of the big benefits of Stratford College, I feel like Stratford College is like, I feel like it's got a big part in my life, like my career, because I feel like I was at in a golden age of Stratford College, because the lecturers were like BBC lecturers, like they were working in the BBC and then teaching. The film staff that were doing the film script writing and doing film production, they were working in film and were script writers for TV. Like they were industry people that were teaching as well as. That was invaluable to the point where Phil, one of our like lead lecturers, he said we don't do anything in the studio unless it's how it would be done at the BBC. So it's like everything's done health and safety wise, like direction, like all of it is done as the industry would do it. And I think that is really valuable to someone that's studying, because you're training then to go into the workplace that you want to eventually potentially go into.
Which a lot of courses don't do. I mean, I remember my experiences, it's all very arty-farty, but they never set you up for being in industry. So that's a brilliant hands-on practical way of understanding that what actually the industry is that you're going to be going into.
Yeah. And then when I did 2 years of an ND, which is a national diploma, and then finished to go and like be a TV director. And then I wanted to go and do like TV direction. Me and my friend had a little opportunity to potentially do some like music TV stuff. This was like 2008 sort of time. And it never really took off. And then Phil, my lecturer, he like called me into college outside of like, obviously I wasn't technically enrolled at college, and was like, what you're trying to do is what we're going to do on the HND course, which is the higher national diploma, which is making music TV and film and radio. He's like, just come back and do that. You'll get a degree out of it. You'll do all of it in, surrounded by support. So I did. I went back and directed TV, music TV, so like Jules Holland kind of style stuff. And I loved that. And that was the thing I was really interested in. And then we produced radio shows, and what else? And then we also like did kind of client work. So we'd go out and do live streaming for companies as part of our HND. And it was like, the beauty of it was that it was built into the course. So if we had if there was an opportunity to come and live stream a conference, for instance, they would build in to the module, like things that we would learn on there. So like it was part of the course. I think it was really innovative at the time. And then when I went to uni to top it up for a year, like I just felt totally out of place, because uni was almost felt like a massive step back for me.
In what sense? In terms of
in terms of the lecturers, in what the projects were. Like I'd been doing, I was spoiled at Stratford. Every week we'd have a new band in to like record in the studio, and then the week after that would go out online on our channel that we set up called Stratcast. And I went to uni, and the first project was that, recording bands in a studio. And I was like, yeah, I've been here before. Let me direct it. I want to do this. And it was like 12 weeks to do one show. They wouldn't let us get bands in. They wanted other media students to play like air instruments, like air guitar. And yeah, it was a nightmare. And then within that 12 weeks, I fell out of love with uni and kind of just wasted away for 2 years in another city. And then, finished that just for the sake of my mother. No, well, more so for the sake of obviously take out loans to go to uni. So I needed to get a degree out of it, and I think they ended up with a 2-2. But yeah, I don't really think about university much anymore.
No, we've discussed this before.
Yeah.
In any creative degree, the minute you leave university, your course result, what you get is irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the work you create.
And there was good elements. Like, I had a really great cinematography lecturer that took us to Pinewood to camera shows, and he was great. And I met a really good friend there. And we used to write films together. That was good. But everything else I felt about the course wasn't to the level that I'd been working at college. And I think that's just a testament to the college. Not necessarily that the uni was rubbish. It was just that the college was extremely good. So it's hard to match that.
Yeah. And I think as you're doing this media course, it's like you say, it's tasters of every bit of every aspect of everything. And you say you had a great cinematography lecturer and you enjoyed the directing side of it. Are you at this point, are you leaning to filmmaking rather than...
Yeah, so at the end of college, I came out wanting to do TV direction and direct TV. And I always feel like from the minute I started college, I always felt like whatever I was doing, I wanted to be in control. And maybe that's a bit I don't know, egotistical, but that was the playground in which I could create. Was if I can direct something, I can look at lighting, I can look at bands, I can look at set, I can look at sound, I can look at ways that we move people on and off set and stuff like that, ways that we can move cameras. And it really that was nice to me. I feel my creativity and my art practice then was about looking at managing a team as such. Managing is the wrong word, but directing a team, but also directing where I want things. I would say it was building with cameras, building with lights, building with people, and placing things. That was my art. So rather than drawing a picture, it was about arranging the things that I had at disposal. So yeah, I think that's where I think my love for direction come from. Seeing the studio as a canvas and all of the people and all of the things and the lights and everything in it as ways to sort of paint onto that canvas.
This is all very practical. So it's not necessarily honing, I'm doing inverted commas, creative.
Yeah.
Or I go back to say, a lot of university courses at the time and mine were very much about expand the idea. What's the creative? What's this? But your course with that media blanket gave you an overall taster of everything.
It was really technical, and it's really technically led. So, and again, with the live streaming and stuff on the HND, it's I call it service-based filmmaking and service-based media, media services, where you're not necessarily there. There is a creative element to it, but you're not necessarily there to impart a creative vision on the brief. You're there to do the job that you need to do. And in that case, it was live streaming, or it was recording a radio show. There's 100% there's elements of creativity in it,
but practical uses.
But it felt it's very practical and it's very responsive to a brief, rather than setting your own brief, which is something that now, 15 years on, I feel like I'm only really learning that now about myself and about my practice.
We can explore that much more, shortly. So you come out of university. What's the route? Are you straight out into practice? I'm a filmmaker, I'm a director, I'm a photographer? What's the...
Yeah, so all of those things, really. But again, I've always really enjoyed the kind of hustle process of stuff. I like running a business. I like that kind of drive to sell something or create something that's going to be sold or whatever. I like working for myself. So I came out, again, wanting to be a TV director, film director now. At uni, me and the friend Andy, we used to work on films together, and I felt then I really fell in love with short film and narrative film rather than TV work.
In what sense? What was it about this medium as opposed to any other?
Well, it expands the creativity in the studio. So with a TV studio, you've got limitations, whereas when you're writing a film, you're not limited. You're limited by budget, but But to start with, when you first put pen to paper, you're not limited. Like, you can tell the stories you want to tell. And we wrote what I thought was a really cool, like, dark comedy about a man that kills himself because of the mundanity of life, and then gets stuck in purgatory, filling out forms, being assessed for why he committed suicide. And I thought that was brilliant. And that really, I really liked that creativity of like creating a world, like a whole world, and then characters that embody that world and stories that go into that. So I came out wanting to do short film direction. It's very difficult, as you'll know, like, to go straight from uni into directing short film.
To make it commercial,
to make it work, to make it sustainable. Mum and dad bought me a graduation present of a little Canon 650D that I could make videos on, that I could take photos with, and I just got to work really, like, trying to make money with it. My philosophy really is that, like, if you're going to work as a filmmaker, as a photographer, you got to just do it, like, because you're going to be shit to start with, and then you'll only get better because you'll learn, and it's better to get paid while you learn, do you know what I mean, than it is to try and do something else. And I came home to live in Redditch with my camera and my mum and dad, and I was working part-time at a coffee shop, and I just, I had the luxury of being able to live at home, rent-free, and work from home. And I decided then to quit my job and was like, I'm going to make this work as a photographer and as a filmmaker. And if not, well, then that's fine. Like, I'm always, I can do other things. Like, but the dream was always to make it work for myself as a filmmaker and as a photographer with this camera. So I did, so the first thing I did was I bought a printer and some cardboard mounts, like little cardboard frames, and went and did loads of dog shows.
You've got to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I think that, like, you want to sell photos. The best way of making quick money as a photographer for me at the time was like, what do people pay money for, really? It's like photos of kids and dogs. That's it. So I'd get 5 or 6 hay bales and a really cheap little light, my printer that was hooked up to my car battery, and my camera. And I would just shoot. I'd go to dog shows or county fairs and just shoot kids on hay bales and then dogs on hay bales. And, like, you do stuff like someone walk past with a dog and you go, oh, like, your poodle's beautiful. What are they called? And they say, oh, they're called Fluffy. And you go, oh, wow, Fluffy's beautiful. And they go, oh, I don't want a photo. It's okay, I don't want a photo. And you go, no, well, look, I need to put some photos on display. Let me take a photo of your dog just so I can put it on display. Your dog's beautiful. And then I'd take the photo, I'd print the photo to put it on display. And they go, oh, how much are they? You go, well, they're $5 a photo or $5 a keyring. Or you can buy 2, or you can buy whatever the deal was that I was doing. And I just used to sell like that. And then I earned enough money to, like, buy a tripod, and then, like, earn enough money to buy a little microphone, and doing odds and sods gigs here and there when I could find them, and friends of friends and friends of family that needed a bit of photo or video. And then eventually I stumbled across a company called Beat Freaks, based in Birmingham. So again, like, just to anyone that's listening that's like, how'd you get started? Like, the fact I was looking everywhere for a job. I mean, LinkedIn, Facebook, like, Gumtree, I was looking for jobs, all the back pages of newspapers, like, anywhere I thought there'd be a job. And just luckily on Gumtree, Beat Freaks had put out a call for a videographer. It was based in Birmingham, which I thought was good because it's a bigger city, it connects me to a bigger network.
And who are Beat Freaks?
So Beat Freaks are a youth engagement agency now. When I first met them in 2013, it was a couple of people in a table with trying to support young people in the arts. So getting them into arts, but then also, like, using art as a tool for social change. So they would run a poetry night. They ran workshops to, like, music, dance, poetry, filmmaking. And
this sort of signifies a real change in your career at this point, really, from going from being the guy that will just do anything, a job in dog photographer at country fairs. You find something. So what was the job actually called?
So it was technically like an internship for doing some video to support the YouTube channel, Beat Freaks YouTube channel, Beat Freaks TV, and we film poets, film dancers, film interviews with artists, and put it out on YouTube. And kind of that was what I was doing there. And then that developed. Like, I really kind of fell in love with that art scene in Birmingham, and, like, the drive to, like, support young people in getting into arts, the kind of social change aspects of stuff. So I stuck around, and then they eventually started, as Beat Freaks, like bear in mind at the time, like Beat Freaks was two people in a coffee shop working out of that, rather than what it is now, which is got an office and a company, and it's much bigger and they do much bigger things. But at the time, we were kind of growing together, you know, and when freelance work come up, they would pass it to me, and that's how I started to build a network.
At this point, you've been the sort of jobbing photographer, the jobbing filmmaker, and now you've had your world opened up to the sort of art scene, as you say, the creative scene, dance, poetry, artists. That must have changed the way you perceive what you can do, what you could do with your work.
Yeah, I think it was almost like, I think it's almost subconscious, because like when whatever the thing is, you're framing a shot, like, right? So you're shooting a video of a poet, you're picking a location, you're framing a shot, you're shooting it how you want to shoot it. And I think, like, without saying, oh yeah, I'm an artist, I'm a filmmaker, I'm an art, you know, that, like, that's what I was doing, really. You're picking ideas, you got like whatever the backdrop is.
But at this point, is it still a practical application?
Yeah, I treated it like a practical application for sure. And like there was loads of side jobs I was doing alongside this. So I was filming a medical conference at Warwick Uni for a bit, and I was filming other things of that nature, like very corporate stuff. You're just there to document the event, and that's what they want. They want the photos, that's that. And then, you know, you go and film some lectures, and that's what they want. There's no real... It wasn't me going like, oh, I think we should shoot it this way, or I think that we should set it here and use these lights. You know, I was very much like, yeah, this is what I can do. My camera can do this. I can do this. So it earns me money. And that was it, right? I needed money. I was making it with the camera. And then Beat Freaks was a bit more of an outlet to be a bit more creative.
Were you being paid by Beat Freaks, or did you say it was an internship?
Yeah, so for the first couple of months, I was kind of doing it like very part-time, like one day a week, maybe, shooting stuff. And they were supporting me in terms of like connections and passing through any freelance photography work, film work. So that worked out really well for me. And then after a few months, as Beat Freaks grew, they hired me part-time on a part-time wage to again support media creation. I learned to facilitate workshops with them. So I was teaching as well with them.
When you say workshops, what sort of workshops are you giving?
So we used to run 2-3 workshop sessions, and I was teaching film and photography. So I was it was mainly photography, I think, making photography, getting people to shoot photography, portraiture, like stuff that interested them. And then you'd have like a little mini exhibition at the end of it. But yeah, that process of facilitation, I learned from being with Beat Freaks. And it was something I really enjoyed, like teaching. I still do now, like teaching and supporting the next generation of filmmakers and photographers. And then a few months after that, they paid me full time so I was with them full time doing, again, like that was a bit more of a business role as well, which was like managing clients, you know, working with organizations to deliver projects.
But all great experience in terms of you as a young creative building your knowledge of every aspect of the industry from a business side as well as a practical side.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really, useful in that sense, because again, like, and it also opened up the door to loads of people that I'd met, and like to the point where like I was just, people knew me as the photographer that was around and the filmmaker that was around, and connected with loads of different people. So
your work must be growing, and your portfolio of work must be growing. The subject matter of your work must be changing. Obviously, dog portrait's been probably put aside now.
Yeah. Although this is only like a year into the journey after uni. Like I left uni in like May, June, whatever time that was. I met Beat Freaks in August, September.
Oh, well, that's quick.
Then probably like 6 months later, 9 months later, I was full time with Beat Freak. So it moved quite quickly.
But yeah, your work must be changing at this point, becoming more social based, documentary film, documentary photography. Yes, in the background, there might be the odd job that you're not going to boast about, because we all as creators have to earn money to pay the gas bill. But did you significantly notice, or was it just a natural evolution?
I've always cared about like social issues, and I think being exposed to poetry and exposed to a massive wider network of artists in Birmingham, there was much more to like understand and learn. And then we had a trip to Bosnia. A group of artists had a trip to Bosnia with Beat Freaks, and it was to learn about like the genocide that happened there in the 90s, and to kind of like use art as a way of telling those stories back to other people in Birmingham and in the UK. And I just took my camera and obviously I just shot everything, filmed loads of interviews. And I think like at that point there's a really great photographer called Tariq Samara who documented that period of time, I think it was like 94 to 96, I think it was. And he documented what was happening in Bosnia, and I saw the work and I thought like it really struck a chord with me about, you know, like the power of sharing images and what that can do and what that can do to change people's attitudes to things.
Was there a specific image of his that resonated with you that really struck that chord? Because I mean, obviously it's quite a harrowing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. At one point, I had a load of postcards of his, and they're really harrowing images. But I think like, again, there's something in that which makes people go like, you know, shit. This isn't just like what we're seeing on the news. There's a real human element to this. And then I thought that's the kind of thing that I think that I could do. Like I care passionately about social issues. I can use a camera. I'm pretty kind of like, I'll go get stuff. Like if I want it, I'll go get it. So I thought maybe that's the kind of career that I'll go into. And then when I came back, I met my friend Adam, who ran an independent news editorial and still does, called I Am Birmingham, and started shooting things with him. Protests, lots of protest stuff, lots of news interview style stuff. And then I kind of developed that love for documentary and journalism, really, like the run and gun of journalism.
I was going to say, because you were doing all sorts. You were doing, you know, right-wing marches. You went to Calais.
Yeah.
Many protests and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, I really loved it. Like, you know, like following a protest, like especially stuff that you're really passionate about. You know, I remember going on the anti-austerity march, and that was like, I think that was like 500,000 people on the streets of London, and that was really like, it was wild to be a part of it.
Can I ask a question? Not being a documentary photographer, and you having obviously covered events that you are socially for and on the alternative, socially against, is there a way that you cover those differently? So, you know, there's a big right-wing march versus an anti-austerity march, but you know, when it's an opposing viewpoint to yours, do you think you photograph that differently? Document that differently?
I think the stuff that I like, so the far right stuff, so we documented like Britain First marching in Dudley was one of the first marches they had, and there was about 100 people there. Now, like those marches probably garner quite a few more. But to be honest, like they kind of, they hang themselves really. Like there's not me skewing anything. Like they're out there doing Nazi salutes, and you just shoot what's in front of you, and it kind of tells its own story especially with that, like the far right stuff. And then like the anti-austerity marches, the anti-Trump march that I went to, again, they kind of tell their own story because people are very passionate about those issues, and it comes across through like banners, through the way that they chant, the way they sing, that kind of stuff. And you're there just capturing it, documenting what's going on. And I think, yeah, maybe sometimes, you know, you might shoot things and look at it and go, oh, actually, that might say something that's a little bit sort of alternative to what the march is.
Do you feel like you have
to
have some sort of impartiality when you're in those situations? Is that the goal? Just to document?
I mean, I don't think so now. I mean, I don't go to that. I wouldn't go to that now with the idea of I'm going to be impartial. And I think maybe that's why I didn't necessarily follow up photojournalism as a career. I think some people try and be impartial, and I think like you can be as impartial as you think you're being, but like the reality is that we've all got our own beliefs, we've all got our own like viewpoints on these huge global issues. So you are naturally going to subconsciously shoot it in a way that will potentially suit your beliefs, and I think that actually is fine.
Well,
I think it's fine because that's
balance. Like they'll probably with another photographer with a different set of beliefs,
exactly.
or another filmmaker with a different set of beliefs.
Exactly, and I think like again, I'm there. I wanted to tell the story of the anti-austerity march. So what is that? That is big wide shots of huge amount of people. It's capturing like people in the backdrop of London. it's capturing banners, signs, and you tend to lean to signs that are more expressive, let's say, just because they look better, they tell a bigger part of the story, like as an image. The people on those marches. And then the same with when you go and document a far right march, and it's very hostile place, like a far right march, especially if you've got a camera, because they'll believe you are part of the media that's trying to silence them and all that kind of stuff. So it's already hostile, like I've had people throw punches at me. Someone did punch Adam's camera, like, as we were filming. Like it's you kind
Volatile
of, it's hard to not, they don't make it easy to like support them. Do you know what I mean? Not that you would necessarily, but it's hard to shoot that and put them in a good light, because they can.
Is there a moment that you sort of start to think photojournalism in that sense is not where you want to be? Not where? What's a trigger for moving away from that?
Yeah. So a couple of years into working with Beat Freaks and freelancing as usual, again working with Beat Freaks 50% of the time, and then me and Adam founded a small like video news agency called Rebels Without a Pause. And the plan was to show like an alternative view to like news. And this all sounds, to now, like in 2024, this all sounds very like, oh, well, everyone's doing that. But it wasn't as much back then. Like things like Novara Media had just started, Double Down News had just started, and we were part of that, I think. And to be honest, like it was great. The only reason we didn't continue it is because we weren't getting paid for it. It was difficult to sustain. But there was stories that we did that I thought were really important. There was, a story of a young lady that shaved her head, huge amounts of hair, to support a friend that was going through cancer treatment. And we talked about why she did it and what the kind of thought processes were. And that was really interesting to me, and I thought really important. There was another one where a group of taken back London Pride Parade from like corporations by like stopping the parade and getting in front of it with banners and kind of reclaiming Pride as a protest movement rather than this kind of corporate party that London Pride had turned into. But they just didn't get the views. Like they would get like maybe a couple of thousand views, and then we put out a video of far right protesters doing Nazi salutes, or a far right protester punching a cameraman, and that'd do like 500,000 views. And you kind of go, well, do I really want to be doing this? Like, is that the thing that I want to be showcasing? And it's not like...
It's how newspapers sell their papers, isn't it?
It's not, I'm not interested in putting 500,000 views on them, like whether it's good or bad. Like, I'm just not, I wanted to tell stories that were interesting and that had depth and we did a couple of things like that, but they just never got the same reaction. So it's difficult then to like want to go and continue doing that when like, oh, well, if we want to get the views up, we need to put out this kind of content, and like, I'm not really interested in that. So finished up with that with our, and went back to freelancing really. And then,
okay, so you're doing this stuff with Adam, you're doing the darker side of things, but you've got Beat Freaks, which is your kind of creative community, and this is kind of your first introduction into the poetry scene, really, when you're...
So through Beat Freaks, I was introduced to poetry, and it's something that I'd never really considered before, past school. Like you learn about war poets, maybe in school, a couple of them. But when I went Beat Freaks, I went to their second or third poetry jam that ever happened, and this was like maybe it was like 11 years ago, and it was at Urban Coffee Company on Church Street in Birmingham. And I remember going, and there'd been like 90 people squeezed bum to bum, shoulder to shoulder in the upstairs of Urban Coffee, even on the stairs, like spreading onto the stairs. And then one mic in the corner with poets coming up, and they might read a piece that they've rehearsed. They might read a piece that they wrote 10 minutes ago. They might be in their 30s, 40s. They might be straight out of college, straight out of school on this microphone, talking poetry. And I think for me, there was something about that community, the fact that it was totally silent and totally respectful of whatever the poet has got to say. I thought, well, actually, that's a really beautiful way to spread good and bad, I suppose, like thoughts, vulnerabilities, all of the kind of stuff that is touched on in poetry. And I think, yeah, for me, it was really interesting and eye-opening because it's a place where, you know, if someone's gone through some trauma, or opposite of that, they've gone through something that's incredibly like celebratory, there's no barrier. Like, you know, you go up there, you sign up, you get on that microphone and you can speak it and say it. And I think like that really sort of blew me away, because I think like for me, poetry is a way of people expressing something that other people will connect to and can connect to.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because I've actually got your quote here. It says,
My quote,
Paul Stringer once said, "Poetry has a profound effect on people. Seeing people connect over a poem, whether it's a shared experience or a discovery, and that they aren't alone in a feeling, gives a person a power that they didn't have before." My question is with that, why do you think poetry hit you so hard? Because I think, again, I've sort of been more introduced to poetry because of you, but I think we've spoken before about most people, unless you are into poetry, don't go to poetry unless there's a wedding, a funeral, or...
Well, this is it. So poetry, yeah, I still stand by that quote. Poetry, I think, changes the world. And I think necessarily mean like it changes the nuts and bolts of the world, but it certainly changes the people that experience poetry. Because that is me. I experience poetry and it opened my eyes to loads of different perspectives, loads of things that I didn't know was going on that I think are important now. And the reason it's so powerful is because you can stand there and you can say, this happened to me, this is how I feel, and this is the experience that I've had. And someone in the audience might go, yeah, that happened to me too. And that shared connection is something that impacts both of those people and changes them, right? Like makes them feel like there's someone else out there that has the same thing or does the same thing or is going through the same thing as me. So that's really, I think the important thing is with poetry is that it is a low barrier of entry, so that you can go and say your truth, speak your experience, listen to other people's experiences. It's open mic. Anyone can sign up and say something. And the more you understand about people and people that aren't necessarily like you, the wider your perspective becomes, and the more like emotionally invested you become in other people's stories and experiences and journeys. I think that leads to better decision making when we're thinking about things like voting, when we're thinking about how we act in society, how we act in our communities, how we act to our neighbours. You know, like when you understand the person more and their experience, you have more compassion to it. And I think like that's why I think poetry will change the world, and it does change the world.
I think it has the possibility. With poetry, I guess you don't know the profound effect that you might have on someone.
I don't think it's quantifiable to like, you know, but I do think, you know, Lem Sisse, who's one of my favorite poets, he said on A Desert Island Discs, poetry connects us to the spiritual and it connects us as a human race. And I'm paraphrasing, by the way, I don't know if that's a direct quote, but one of the things that's mentioned is that, you know, I read a poem at my granddad's funeral, and I read a poem at my best mate's wedding, and neither of those people you would say like were overly, well, they're not poetry lovers, but in that moment, a poem connected a room of people. And the same when people retire, you know, someone retires at a factory, someone's got a stupid limerick like, or a funny poem to read, or, you know, birthdays, all of that kind of stuff. Look at every, you know, greetings card, there's silly poems in there. And I don't think people realise actually that they are poetry lovers, but they don't sit in a coffee shop and listen to it. So I think it's not one massive change happening at once, but it is ripples. And actually, I think there's something really powerful about like an almost like a much more gentle approach to changing minds. And poetry, again, it's an art form, you know, it's a technical and it's a skillful art and it's a craft. The people that can really utilize that craft, you know, have huge impacts on people and perceptions, and it's easier, you know, it's an easier way of learning about something when you hear it wrapped in a poem, you know.
And it's clearly had a huge impact on you. And massively influenced the work that you're producing, I want to talk to you about a big project that was an Arts Council funded exhibition, The City That Spoke to Me, where this is where you sort of really are doing your bit to highlight poetry, to get it out there a bit more mainstream, I guess, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that project, The City That Spoke to Me, and what it was all about, how it came about? Obviously through your passion for photography, but it's obviously that passion has now, you're niching down and you're becoming almost like Mr. Poetry.
Well, I don't know about Mr. Poetry, but I think, so The City That Spoke to Me, I wanted to do a project that celebrates those things that I saw in poetry. You know, I came to poetry very much like a rabbit in the headlights, kind of like it was a big moment. It was a big shift in understanding what I liked in art, you know, what I liked to listen to, what I thought was important.
Before we move on, is there a poem that really stood out to you from those times?
There is like there's a poem that Casey Bailey does or did called Tap Tap Tap, and it's interesting because the poem is about a kid with ADHD that is at school, and it's like tap 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 tap, the desk becomes my drum. And it's like this story of this kid that's tapping his desk and he can't stop, and then he gets sent to the head and he's tapping there, and they're kind of like, just stop tapping, like just stop tapping, and you won't get in trouble. But like there's this, it's an impulse to tap or like move or you know, which is one of the kind of symptoms of ADHD. And I was like, well, that's me. Like that kid is me. I never knew it. I never put a name to it. I never put a diagnosis to it. But I was like, that kid is me. That is exactly how I was at school. That's exactly how I am now. And I think
that's what you're talking about with poetry, isn't it? Exactly, that ability to just find that connection. You go, oh, I'm not alone in this.
Yeah,
someone else is saying.
Profound change. Like I really like learned something about myself. And then it was like, I go listen to other people talk about ADHD. I go and speak to people that have been diagnosed. I go and listen to Adrian Childs did a really good podcast about it and talks about a moment where I think this is the Adrian Childs interview. Pretty sure it is. But he talks about wanting to like sit in a restaurant and having an impulse to throw a glass of wine, like just and having to like suppress that impulse. And I had an exact same situation happen to me, like where as a kid, I put pepper in my hand at a cafe opposite my dad. And I was like, I went to blow the pepper at him, and I was like, gotta stop yourself. You can't blow pepper at your dad. And I just thought, nah, fuck it, I'll do it. I just did it. And it was like, I realized like, you know, all of these sort of things, all the things that people used to say at school, my teachers, you know, the reports that I'd get, it all very much fit with like the kind of thing that Casey was talking about. And
we'll have to put a link into the poem by Casey Bailey.
So yeah, so since then, so The City That Spoke to Me was really about like trying to show what I saw in poetry, like why it's had such a profound effect on me, and try and get more people interested in that, as well as celebrating the poets that inspired my like kind of starting of a journey into poetry.
And originally you wanted this to be a documentary, but how did it manifest itself?
So originally I wanted to make a film called Hidden Philosophers, and that was about following 4 people's journeys around the UK, 4 poets, and their life and journey leading up to an event, a poetry event. And it never really got past initial interviews with poets. I did like 3 interview sessions to kind of find the poets that I would follow. And yeah, I mean, again, like, you know, at this point in my life, I just had a child. I just moved into a house with my partner. Like finances it was about making money to survive rather than having the time to go and make a film. So it just didn't fit. Like resources weren't there. Just time didn't fit. So I kind of parked it for a bit. And then the next idea was to photograph like and celebrate open micers and do portraits of every open micer I could find. That wasn't practical because it's kind of like, it's a photo booth essentially. But it wasn't practical to do it at that time. Like I just didn't have time, space. So I thought about, at that point I was shooting poetry events at the Hippodrome, and Chris from the Hippodrome, he mentioned, you know, like you shoot a lot of poetry events, maybe you should put your poetry work on the wall, like put some of the photos up on the wall in the Hippodrome.
And just for reference, the Hippodrome is a big theatre here in Birmingham.
Yeah, so Chris from the Hippodrome just mentioned it like off the cuff, and I was, you know, And I kind of thought, well, if I'm going to have work in the Hippodrome, it needs to be the best work I've ever produced. And like, I do think my event photography, my poetry photography is good. But also I thought it was an opportunity now with a space to produce something that was maybe a bit bigger than my event photography.
And also with a personal portrait, you can be much more intimate. You can tell a person's story much more than you can at, say, a live event, right?
Yeah. So then I started to think about like what I was going to do. And this was like pre-pandemic. This was maybe a year before pandemic. So like 2018, 2019. And yeah, I sort of settled on the idea of trying to represent my journey into poetry as a way of saying like, I've gone through this journey. You can too. One of the worries that I had starting the project was that it would look like I'm kind of going, these are the best poets in Birmingham. I've photographed them. I've put them on the wall, like, and being a bit of a gatekeeper. And it's trying to get away from that was the challenge. And to do that, I picked a few poets that had really inspired me, that are the ones that I thought like, yeah, like I love poetry because of these people. Like the first sort of few poets that I really got into,
such as
Casey Bailey, Joe Cook, Jasmine Gardosi. They were like Amira Salah. They were people that I looked at as like real inspirations in and people that I thought were, you know, that started that like sort of my discovery of poetry. And then I asked them to suggest people that inspired them. So you could see this kind of like two-tier of this kind of like two-tier of people being inspired by. And then I photographed those as well. So people like Stephen Camden, Polar Bear, Dreadlock Alien, Bogdan Piasecki. And then like I really wanted to add texture to it. So we managed to get an arts council. So I got supported by a company called Apples and Snakes, who are a big poetry organisation. And Owen from Apples and Snakes helped me write the bid to go and shoot 12 poets, interview them all, commission them to write a poem about Birmingham's poetry scene, which is kind of the inception meta moment there, because they are Birmingham's poetry scene. And then, but Hippodrome also offered to pay to have it all translated into BSL. So we had BSL videos, British Sign Language videos, and transcripts so that it was accessible. Because again, like poetry in the city is accessible, for the most part. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that everyone can access it. There's very, very high kind of not production, but like it's very avant-garde and very well kind of rehearsed and professional poets. But there's also poets that have just started out and that are just coming into it. So that was something that I wanted to represent, the accessibility, like how, everyone should be able to access poetry. So that was a big part of it. And then, yeah, it was just kind of like planning out how we were going to do it. And I chose to shoot at people's homes. I wanted to show that people's writing spaces were different, but they're connected by this stage, by the microphone, by poetry, but their experiences are different. They all wrote a poem, which is obviously like they presented, I asked for handwritten poems, and they were all presented differently. And then I asked for an artifact from each person, so something that connected them to Birmingham's poetry scene. So Amira gave me a bow tie that had her poetry written on it. She's very famous for performing in a bow tie. Spoz gave me a mic stand that had been like over a decade of poetry events. Sipo gave me a t-shirt that from his first poetry collective that he was in. So it was kind of trying to add texture to the photographs. So like the photographs, this is the poet, this is their poem, this is what they think of Birmingham's poetry scene. But then there's added texture to it. Like these are the things that matter to them. These are the artifacts.
Also, like you speak about, every poet's got a different lived experience. I mean, every person's got a different lived experience. But if you'd have shot all these people in the same studio, it wouldn't have worked, would it? You need to see that their environments are different, their spaces, they're all inherently different people.
I think it would have been, it's a different project if it's shot all in studio. But yeah, it was that having people in their space, their writing space. And that comes through on the photographs. They really are different, And
how long was that being exhibited at the Birmingham Hippodrome?
So it was exhibited for 4 months, I think, four and a half months.
Footfall.
Yeah, it did really well. Lots of footfall and lots of good positive vibes.
But that wasn't the end of the city that spoke to me as a project, was it?
No.
What happened? Can you tell us what happened after that?
Yeah, so also, but just to mention, one of my favourite moments of that exhibition was Spoz, who's a real poetry legend, like nuts and bolts of Birmingham's poetry scene for a long time. And they had a school group at the Hippodrome for a poetry festival. And he teaches in schools, there's poetry in schools. And all these kids were getting like selfies with his portrait that was on the wall. And he was like, I'm right here. You can have a selfie with the real thing. They're like, no, I want a selfie with the portrait. And I just thought that was really funny.
Shows the caliber of the portrait.
Well, yeah, the portrait was better than the real thing. No, but I just thought that was really funny. But
that's cool. But,
there was a lot
like you say, the clientele of the Hippodrome is massively varied and different. So a lot of people from different walks of life would have seen that. And it's unquantifiable. You can never know whether who went to look at that different poem because they saw that picture. So after the exhibition at the Hippodrome, what happened to the city that speaks to me as a project?
So the city that spoke to me went into storage. Essentially, again, like, you know, the facts of being an artist, being a practicing artist, is that things like that don't come along that often, you know.
But as a slight divergent thing there, you're now considering yourself an artist.
Yeah, I think that exhibition really gave me the reason that I think that I'm an artist now. Actually, I think because of that exhibition, I really had to look at why I was doing it, you know, and that is, I think, what makes an artist, which is where you understand the reason that you're producing something, and also like putting myself into the exhibition.
I can see your passion in poetry, but what's the why?
Well, I don't know, really. It's difficult to put into a sentence because it's about celebrating poetry, and it's also, maybe thinking about it now, maybe it's more about celebrating that anyone can journey into poetry and be inspired and feel like a part of that community, and that the example is it's my journey through the people that I met along the way. And I think that's where the artistry comes into it, which is that, like, I think that my journey into poetry through these poets can be replicated and other people can experience what I've experienced. And the beauty of that is that you get to celebrate great poetry and great poets alongside talking about that journey. And I think that's where I really learned about being an artist more so than just being a photographer, which is that you have to understand what's your involvement in this project, what's your, you know, like, you are a part of it as the photographer, whether you like it or not, like the way you shoot it, the way you curate it. So I had to understand that before I could start to think about like what I was doing, you know, like the physical, what I was doing. So after the exhibition at the Hippodrome, it went into storage. The exhibition went into storage for a bit, and I was trying to find somewhere else to showcase it. And I spoke to someone from the library, Birmingham, because I felt like it was very relevant, being poetry, being about the city. And they were well up for it. And we had 4 months at the library. The royal me and the poets, you know, I had 4 months at the library. That got really good footfall, like huge amounts of footfall, because it went through summer holidays. Met some people from outside the UK that had seen it, and had emailed me and spoke to me about it. So that was good. Yeah, and then now it's kind of, again, like it's on ice for a little bit. I've got other projects that I'm working on. But eventually I think I'd like to go back to it. But I also have other ideas for photography projects with poetry. But at the moment, what fits is what I'm working on now, which is crate poetry.
Perfectly segueing into our next topic of choice, really, which is you've now moved into PS Studios, which is a space available to any creative for hire in Birmingham. But that's allowed you to expand this love of poetry much further, and you've now got a new project called Crate Poetry, which is across all social media. I'm sure you're going to tell us about it, but predominantly YouTube-based.
Yeah, so it's a digital platform for well-produced, high-quality poetry performance sets. And I felt like a portrait of a poet is great, but my real ambition, I don't know, just glance over that. Like the portraiture and the exhibition is great, but they are moments. Like that's a moment in time. It's a capture of a moment in time. Whereas with a performance set, it's always living and breathing and growing. And, you know, that's the intention, is to create a living archive of great poetry, really good performance poetry and poets, and, you know, celebrate that with high quality, well produced video. And funny enough, actually, it's almost a return to the TV direction stuff that I was doing at college. It's a bit of a circle. I never thought of it like that until now, which is that, I built a set, hence the name Crate Poetry. It's built out of crates. It's kind of inspired by NPR's Tiny Desk Concerts and Colours show, that kind of really well produced musical sets. But I thought there was a bit of a gap in the market in terms of performance poetry sets, where there's loads of great poetry channels that do recordings of people at events. So it might be one poem or one event with loads of different poets on it, and they'd always put up one poem. And I just didn't see anything. There's a few that have done obviously there's loads of well-produced poetry films, well-produced poetry performances, but they're always it's most of one poem. And they're obviously all very different in how they're set up and stuff. And what I wanted to do was create an NPR Tiny Desk style production where a poet can come in, they can perform 3, 4, 5, 6 poems, and have this really beautiful polished set that goes out, and people can listen to it and not have to keep going through poets. Like, it's all in one go. You get more context of what a poet is like when you can give them a whole set. You give them 15 minutes, you learn more about what that poet is interested in and their ideas, rather than just one poem out of a huge collection or whatever. So what I'm trying to do with Cray is create a platform in which poets can perform and do these sets that can be shared with a global audience, because that's digital and online, and the traction you can get online is much more than I can get with an exhibition. And I think exhibitions are part of what I love to do, and they're good for showcasing moments in time. But Crate Poetry has the potential to archive and live online forever. And I think that's the thing that I'm interested in. If my ambition is to support and archive and produce film and video about poetry and about poets, then the best vehicle for that is to do something that lives forever, and the archives, and that can be shared all over the world.
And like you say, an exhibition is great, but poetry is a performance art, really.
Yeah, no.
I think so, because how a poet delivers a poem, the cadence, the tone, can dictate it. And I think
it does.
Like you say, once that poem leaves a live performance, obviously it's taken. If you're reading it as a written word, it's up for the viewer, the reader, to take that poem in whatever context it's thing. But I think poetry in that sense is a very much more interesting performance thing. So you're giving people this platform. It's exciting, right?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, performance poetry and written poetry are almost two different mediums in themselves, because with a written poem, you can do things with negative space, and you can do things with how the poem is presented in a book. I've got poetry books that are full of 4-line poems, or I've got a poetry book that's got interesting ways of formatting the text in order to create an effect as well. So I think it's a different medium almost. Performance poetry is much more theatrical to a degree. It's about, like you said, the cadence, the performance of that piece. I think it's just important that people can have a space that's aspirational, that go, I want to do a Crate Poetry, right? And I'm gonna do my best to share that and to make sure that people can hear and see the poets on Crate Poetry. That is my responsibility to the poet, which is that make something that's really good to look at, make something that's going to be shared far and wide, and put my efforts into promoting that. We've launched, and there's some brilliant poets on there already. There's some more to go out, and it's partly because I have the studio, and I think to come back to that, the space of a studio gives you that canvas to create something.
Imagine trying to do something like Crate Poetry without the space. You'd have to hire every time you wanted to do it. You'd have to store stuff everywhere.
Exactly. So the beauty of this is that the studio is paid for in effect. It's part of my day-to-day work, which means that I can have this opportunity to just create stuff and make things. And the first thing I did was buy a load of crates, both for storage, but also because crates are really good for set building.
But you didn't have, when you were buying the crates, you didn't have Crate Poetry in mind.
No, I had an idea I wanted to do like poetry sets, but I didn't know what it was going to look like. But crates are really great because I've used them for photo sets. I've used them for storing things. They also make brilliant set for crate poetry. And crate poetry, that is it. Like the name is based because of the crates. The crates came before, the name. But yeah, and one of the things, so again, like kind of looking at the legacy of the exhibition and the way I produced The City That Spoke to Me, the crates are there to be filled by the poet. So I light the crates, I add plants and things like that, those kind of little details. But I ask every poet to bring items to decorate their set, right? And like that gives the viewer a little bit more about who they are. And we've had people bring flags in. I've had people bring in like stuffed animals, like toys, not taxidermy. People have brought in record collections. People have brought in drawings and like paintings.
But that visual consistency is always there, but with those slight personal elements.
So again, like looking at the inspirations, colors, for example, I do it on a green screen, so I expand the studio past just the crates and the backdrop, so it's a wide shot, and I love that because it looks almost like it can't be a real place. And I like that. And the crates kind of link you back to it being real and like link you back to it being actually in reality. But I think, so like the colors, you look at a colors video without the title, it's colors.
And for anyone that hasn't seen a colors video, we'll leave a link to their channel. Yeah. Where have you been living?
They're great. I know, yeah. Most people I think will have seen it popped up. And they're, incredible musicians, but they're shot so beautifully and so clean and so well. And the color backdrops are really what, you recognize. And then again, like likewise with NPR Tiny Desk, it's set in their office, like the setup is behind a desk and there's loads of things that have been left by artists and stuff. And I like the idea that someone looks at it and goes, yeah, that's crate poetry, because they see the crates and they see the backdrop and they see the color and they go, that's a crate poetry. Yeah. And I think that brand identity and that uniform look is a good thing. Like it's positive for the channel because again, it's about the real reason I'm doing it is to celebrate poetry and to get good, get poetry out into the world that people can listen to and understand, change perspectives, that kind of stuff. So yeah. And the studio itself obviously lends itself to that. It's a bought and paid for, it's not bought and paid for, but I paid for my studio for all my other work as well as Crate. So it's just having that space to be able to think, to be able to explore what a set might look like. It wouldn't happen in this way if I was doing it without a studio, like you said, I would have had to hire a space maybe.
Well, essentially it's a passion project at the moment. Yeah. Because it's you say, your commercial work facilitates you to have a space. The space facilitates you to create a personal project that is Create Poetry, which is your passion about, giving poets a platform. And I think it's interesting. You mentioned something about when you were talking about The City That Spoke to Me, about how you didn't want to be a gatekeeper. And I think this is perfect because you can have obviously the greats who you've always had, like Casey Bailey and things like that. But then you put how's that going to work? Is there going to be a new poets?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I'm like that obviously. I put out a post on my Instagram before I'd started Create Poetry just to get a few people in to test it. Really. That's what I wanted to do. And I had 35 people get back to me in about 3 hours.
Wow.
And I had to just take the post down because that's too many to start with. There's too many to start with. I couldn't manage it. So.
And were they all local poets?
Yeah, they were mostly local poets. And then I kind of built the set and I just started to look at how it was going to look, and I built the set. I tested the green screen stuff. And then my friend Jasmine Gardosi messaged me and was like, my friend Lay's over from Estonia and they're great, you should really do a Create Poetry with them if you want, And now Jazz, Jazz word is gold, always been a huge supporter of my work, and really been, I've known them for a decade since those first poetry nights. So you kind of just have to kind of trust Jazz. And Lay came in and we did this, the first Create Poetry set, and it was fantastic and it looked great and it sounded great. And then, I think I have a few stipulations on being on Crate, and that's partly just because there's such a massive response to it. I just haven't got the time to film everyone. But also I like the idea of it being aspirational. I like the idea of, you know, people that are just starting out on open mics maybe look to it and go, oh wow, like maybe I want to go on Crate, you know, I want to be featured on Crate eventually. And I think it's a good place. It's a good way of having like that kind of like aspirational place to go and perform poetry. And again, like I said, I'm really committed to sharing it and making it as wide reaching as possible. So I hope that it has value for those poets. So yeah, there's not necessarily like a selection process, but I like to try and have poets that know poetry off by heart, that they've been performing, you know, they're on a journey of performing, they are doing performances. Just because there's obviously limited time, so you want to kind of make it so that people feel like, yeah, I'm going to get there, like I'm going to get.
And also, from your point of view, with the Crate Poetry brand, not to be cynical, but you've got to have some sort of quality control. If the poets that come on aren't of a high quality, people might not watch.
Yeah,
or might different response to poetry that you don't want, really.
Yeah, I don't think that it's not that the poets aren't quality. I don't think that because I don't actually think that. I think all poetry is good. Like, I don't think there is necessarily bad poetry and good poetry. I think there's delivery. I think some people are more developed in their
Yeah, of course. There's a
writing.
subjectivity to it. I mean,
and they're more developed in like the performance element of it. But yeah, it's more about really, yeah, like making sure that people, when they come on, they're like, you know, this is going to live forever on the internet. So I want people to be proud of what they put out, you know, less about what the channel looks like and more about that someone goes, yeah, I'm really proud to share that in 5 years, rather than going, oh, I wish I'd done this when I went on I did Crate Poetry, or I wish I'd learned this poem, or I wish I'd done this poem instead, or I wish I'd done that instead. Like, I want people to feel like they're really proud of what they've produced. So yeah, there's that kind of, that's really the only sort of filter for it, which is that, are you comfortable performing, you know, and that's it. And that's it. And we've had, I've shot 18 poets now, and they're all fantastic. They're all really, really good. And there's more to come, and they're also really fantastic.
And that's what I was going to ask. What is the sort of aspiration for Crate Poetry, Paul Stringer? Are you going to, like you say, you had other projects in mind with I mean, not to say you're Mr. Poetry, but obviously you found your passion. You've sort of niched down into it. Yes, obviously there's other commercial work that perhaps, like we all do as creators, we're not going to show anyone. But this seems to be the one where you're really like, yes, I'm shouting about this. I am the poetry photographer, the poetry filmmaker. I've got the poetry YouTube channel.
Again, I think, you know, I love photographing and documenting and sharing things that make people happy and like make people proud. And I think like that's, you know, for me, poetry's been a real like sort of life-changing experience. And I think at this moment in time, because I don't know where I'll be in 5 years or 2 years or even 1 year, but at this moment in time, and for the last however many years, it's been, yeah, like my focus. Like, I think I can have an impact on, you know, by documenting poetry. I think there's something there that I find really exciting. And I think, you know, that's what I want to get out of bed for, is I want to get out of bed for stuff that excites me, that's different every day. You know, there's a poet coming on that's going to do some beatboxing in poetry. You know, there's poets that are going to come on with bits of music potentially. I like the idea there's going to be poets that are going to come on with, where English isn't the language of poetry, you know, and I'm interested in that. That's different and it's exciting because it's not just the same old every day. And I think, you know, that's what excites me at the moment. It might change, but really, like the goal for Crate Poetry, I mean, like, you kind of just have to say it. I've been reading a lot about this, but Crate Poetry will be a global platform for performance poetry. That is it. And for as long as I have this studio, I'll be producing Crate Poetry, and for as long as it's wanted and needed, I will produce it. And I think that's given me a bit of direction, and I think there's funding opportunities potentially down the line and stuff like that to make it a bit more self-sufficient. But I enjoy the process of creating. Like, one of the hardest things for me about the exhibition, The City That Spoke to Me, was writing the funding bid. Was actually like even though it was all laid out for me, you know, like someone had literally laid it out almost bullet point by bullet point. These are the things you need to write about. this is the thing you need to say about the project. And obviously, like, no one's pulling any wool over eyes, but like, I just physically struggle to write those kind of things.
But you're a maker and a doer, aren't you? And it goes back to what we've discussed
exactly.
about.
So, which is why Crate was great for me, because I have the space, I can just make it happen, and the funding and the admin stuff, like, I don't get bogged down in that. But I think to make it sustainable, that's probably a route that I will go down. But it's just great. Like, I've got so many ideas for it, and like stuff that, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is how do you turn the thing that you're working on, into the thing that you want to create. So I want to make more poetry films, like films that have poetry as whether it's the narration or whether the real influence. And I can do that with Crate Poetry. It's the same kind of thing. I can make, I can have a channel or within a channel and have films that are produced that.
You've created a brand with Crate Poetry that anything goes poetry-wise. You can do whatever you want to do with it. Yes, you've got a format that, say, matches NPR or colours or that look, which I understand why you want it to be, there's a Crate Poetry video. Yeah. There's a Crate Poetry video. But you've created that umbrella brand that you can do all those things under.
Yeah. It's a great, like, it's a place to experiment with poetry and with film. Again, I run a live streaming company with a friend, and we live stream poetry festivals, and that again, like, really links in. I want to do some live streams, poetry sets, and like, I think I found something that I can really explore all of the things that I love about being creative, making films, shooting photography, building sets, polished, I can do everything that I like to do within this umbrella. And who knows, like 3 years from now, I might not feel the same way. I might have something else that I'm really interested in, and that's fine. But at this time, I have this platform and this passion, and I think, why not just like chase it as much as you can and then follow it up, because we're going to be dead soon. So might as well do the thing that you love while you're here, innit? So
couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. And that seems like a good place for us to sort of call it a day on your story. I have got a couple of little closing traditions that I want to...
Closing traditions?
Closing tradition. Well, they're not closing. They're not closing traditions yet, but I'm hoping they will become closing traditions. I want to leave the listeners with something inspiring. So I always ask the guest on the podcast to give us some sort of quote that has maybe hit with them or that resonates with them. Yeah, that's given you some sort of inspiration along the way.
Yeah, so one of the quotes that really sticks out for me is a quote from Jim Carrey, which he talks about a story of his dad being an accountant and doing it because it was a safe job, and then eventually getting sacked from it or laid off, or however you want to sort of whatever interpret that. And he says, you can fail at something that you don't like, so you might as well try and do the thing you do like. And I think that's really important to me. And I think, like you might fail, but I'd rather fail trying to do the thing that I love than doing something else. And funny enough, actually, another one sticks out. Seth Rogen says on a podcast, so he says, the people that made it, the people that he knows that have made it are ones that never quit. And that's it. If you quit, you definitely won't make it. But if you don't quit, well, you might make it. So,
dude, this has been brilliant. And one last thing.
Yes.
That, like you're doing with Crate Poetry, the spider reach of the Creative Noahland podcast, I'm asking every guest to suggest someone, an interesting, inspiring guest that they think would be a great guest to come on the Creative Noahland podcast.
Okay, yeah. So we've spoken about him quite a lot through this for the podcast. So I'm going to suggest Casey Bailey as someone that you should speak to.
And Casey's the guy that wrote As You Are Tapping Away There.
He wrote Tap Tap Tap.
Sorry.
He also wrote The Ballad of the Peaky Blinders for BBC One.
And was Birmingham's Poet Laureate.
Last year's Birmingham Poet Laureate, which was 22-23 Poet Laureate.
Amazing. And do you think he's going to say yes?
I would hope so. He's a very busy man. I think he's like a deputy head teacher in his day-to-day.
We can work around his busy
I'm sure
schedule.
He'll tell you all about
Paul,
this.
Thank you so much. I'm going to include links to everything Crate Poetry, Paul Stringer, the new studio that is available for rent by any creatives in Birmingham. You can check it out. And just want to say, dude, thanks again for doing this.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Noahland podcast. If you found anything inspiring or useful in this episode, please consider subscribing or maybe sharing the episode with a friend. Anything you can do to help promote and support Creative Nomaland is so beneficial, and I really appreciate it. Check out the website and sign up to the newsletter to be the first to know of everything that's going on here in Creative Nomaland. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, explore, inspire, and create.
Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way. And so, therefore, it's so important to consider this question: what do I desire?